Welcome to The Friday Habit with Mark Labriola and Benjamin Manley. The Friday Habit is for small business owners, freelancers, and creatives who are ready to take their business to the next level. Join us as we discover how to apply the strategies we learn to grow our businesses, make more money, and live every day like it's Friday. And welcome to The Friday Habit. Ben, how you doing?
Man, I'm doing good. I am making a last minute trip out to Costa Rica tonight. So get my bags packed and just excited to get going.
Okay. I love Costa Rica. One of my top favorite places. Well, hey, I'm excited for our show today because we have an author on who I'm a big fan of, who's got a series coming out on Apple soon and has a lot of knowledge, I guess you could say, about a lot of different things. So I'm excited to talk to him about his journeys and artificial intelligence and a bunch of other things. So today we have Hugh Howey on the podcast, and he is the New York Times bestselling author of over 20 novels. His book Wool is now a TV show called Silo on Apple TV Plus, and his Beacon 23 novel comes out later this year on AMC. His books have been translated in over 40 languages and have sold millions of copies around the world. So, Hugh, welcome to the Friday Habit.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, we're super excited.
Yeah. Now, in your bio, we talk about your books and all the great things that you've written and all the success you've had there. But I'd love for you to kind of share a little bit of your journey and your story with our audience about even how you got to becoming an author and kind of what you were doing with your life before you started writing novels and stuff like that. So I'd love to kind of hear a little bit of that. I mean, did you grow up always thinking that you'd be an author or that you wanted to be a writer, or how did that kind of come about?
Yeah, I've been dreaming of it since I was 12 or 13 years old. I started as an avid reader. I was one of those kids that walked on the street with a book open, bumping into trash cans and light posts, read under my desk at school. I was just a complete bookworm and nerd. And I read a couple of books when I was like 12, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Ender's Game, that made me want to be a science fiction writer, but I had no idea what to do. I spent 20 years trying to write a book and never could finish it. So by the time I hit my 30s, I don't know if this is common or not, but I thought like all my productive years are behind me, which was so silly in retrospect. But I felt like an impatience and a frustration with I didn't feel like I was where I was supposed to be in life, And I was like 32 years old when I sat down to write what would become my first novel. And it's funny, looking back now, I realize how young I was and how much creative time I had ahead of me. But at the time I felt like I was washed up. So goes to show what I know. But once I read my first book, I was just hooked on it, and I was like, I'm going to write 2 or 3 books a year for 10 years and just see if I can, make a career out of this.
What helped you get over the hump that time? You said you had tried before. What helped you kind of get over that and get that first one done?
I think a lot of things have to build up. It's like a synapse firing in your brain. It's not like you get one input and then it fires off. The neuron has to get maybe 15 triggers and then it fires. But the one that really the straw that broke the camel's back was I was at a book conference just covering it as a book reviewer and critic, and this author was giving a talk on a panel, and someone in the audience said, "Hey, I've been trying to write a book and I'm not having much success." They're basically talking like me, but it was someone else. And this author just slapped the table and stood up really angry and said, "You stop talking about writing. You stop telling people you're going to write. And you stop asking other people questions about writing. And you just sit down and you write." And my hair was blown back. I felt like she was yelling at me. She wasn't even looking at me, but I was like, she sees my psyche. And I went home from that, and a few things kind of culminated. I was meeting more authors and realizing that they were just regular people who didn't get in their own way. And I was getting in my way for many years. And that was the book that I just sat down and started writing. And I didn't care if it was good or not. I just was not going to let myself, stop myself. There's no one who could stop me but me. And I'd been doing that for years.
Well, What were you doing before 32?
My first career, I kind of stumbled into it. I was living on a sailboat in college, and I dropped out of school and sailed down to the Bahamas and just sailed around for about a year, and just like a vagabond. And I started doing odd jobs on people's boats in exchange for food or a little bit of spending money. And the jobs got more involved and the boats got bigger. And by the time I was like 24, 25, I was driving 150, 160 foot mega yachts all over the world. And it paid well, but you couldn't really have a relationship. It was very much it wasn't what I dreamt of doing. It was just kind of something I was good at. And it was during a lot of these boat deliveries and boat trips where I would have hours at the helm, just staring at the horizon. And I was daydreaming about the books I was eventually going to write. And when I got out of yachting and I was like inland with an ex-girlfriend, that's when I finally took the time and started getting these novels written.
Wow. So when you first sat down to write, like, did you have a certain formula that you followed, or, did you get some sort of book at the library? It's like how to write a book. Like, what was your process to even start like banging something out that eventually turned into your first novel?
The best way to learn to write is to read. It's like playing music. You just have to listen to a lot of tunes, and you absorb rules that aren't written down anywhere. They're just shared knowledge that's been passed down through lots of other artists. And when you read books, it's the same. If you talk to a lot of best-selling authors, they don't know why what they do works, like how to get someone to love a protagonist, like in a paragraph. But they've absorbed so much good story that they just figure, they regurgitate it. And I think of reading as like listening to a tuning fork for a writer. You kind of get the pitch correct before you start, with your own voice. And at the time that I wrote my first book, I was reading and reviewing a novel every day for a website. So every morning I would sit and I would spend 8 to 10 hours reading an entire book, and then I would write a review, and the next day I would do it again. And I was doing that for a few months and going through, hundreds of books, and it just put me like, I was so full of story that when I went to write, it just poured out of me like so easily.
Wow. I love that. And I think that is such a great reminder to everyone, right? To like, it starts with you just doing, and that's why I tell a lot of young guys who are coming up who are like, how do I get started? I say, start just taking photos, start just making videos, like spend time just doing those things, because at some point you'll have the right opportunity, and then your skill set will be ready to take on that opportunity, which will then beget more work and more opportunity. But really it's about just doing it. I mean, that's what I kind of hear from you. Like you're saying, like, I really was just reading a novel a day and writing about it and absorbing all these, voices and ways to explain things, that then when I came down to do it myself, it just kind of poured out of me. And so, a lot of times people think that, oh, wow, you were just this guy who just was so gifted and talented, and you just woke up one day and wrote Wool. But it's like, well, no, it was the hours and hours and hours that you spent before then, where you were absorbing all these things that subconsciously were just making you a better writer.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've dispelled the myth of the prodigy. Like whenever we find someone who's like 10 and they wrote their first opera, then we find out that they got obsessed with operas when they were like 5 and spent 5 years just like listening to opera.
Right.
And so there's always this feeling of like overnight success that has a different story behind it. And another thing that helped me, writing those reviews every day got me in the habit of writing daily. And before I was trying to write novels I would get a little inspired and I would write a little bit. And then like a week later, I'd write a little bit more. And you cannot finish a novel that way. Like you have to do it daily. And that really unlocked, that was the big secret for me. Like if you apply something with consistency like that, it accrues really quickly.
Yeah. That's so awesome. So what did you learn about yourself though? Like how are you making money during this time? Were you a barista at a coffee shop? I mean, what were you doing? Were you getting paid for the articles that you were writing, or like how are you making a living? Like, what kind of life is that, as an author? Like when you're first starting out, what kind of sacrifices are you making, and like how are you making ends meet in order to kind of pursue that? Because it seems like it's a very time consuming thing to sit down and like write all day.
Very time consuming. I think the key, we have this archetype of the starving artist, and there's some truth to it. Like, it doesn't have to be starving in a caloric way, but there are things you have to go without. And it really helped that I was averse to debt. So I lived a very simple life. I lived I lived 5 years on a sailboat that cost me $10,000. People pay more for a car, and I lived out at anchor a lot. So I had no living expenses. When I was writing, I had saved up money in the yachting industry. I lived in a 750 square foot house that I paid cash for. Tiny. You can imagine how small this home was. Like the bedroom was basically a bed inside. That was all there was room for. I had no debt. I didn't my entertainment was to walk my dog. We went on hikes. Every morning I would put on a crock pot with like cheap, veggies and whatever the cheapest cut of meat was. And it tasted amazing. It's amazing what a can of cream of mushroom soup and some dried onions will do to in a crock pot all day. And so I wasn't unhappy. I was living a great life, but my friends would go out to concerts and fly overseas. And I just was concentrating on living a simple life and putting all my energy into my craft. Once I'd written my first book and I did a book signing at a bookstore, I talked to the manager and they were looking for someone to work part-time, just 30 hours a week, $10 an hour. While I was writing Wool, I was making $300 a week before taxes were taken out. And that was more than I needed to pay my bills. So being willing to make that sacrifice gave me a huge advantage over other people. Like I was able to write 2 or 3 books a year, which is a huge leg up on someone who's writing 1 book every 5 years. What I've noticed in the people who have this kind of success, most of them are making sacrifices like that. And it really separates you from people who aren't willing to. And that's a question you have to ask yourself if you're trying to make it in any kind of industry that requires a grind. Are you out hustling 9 out of 10 people around you? And if you are, think good things are going to happen just eventually,
So how many years were you doing that? Was Wool your first kind of big success, or were some of the other books also starting to fund you slowly over time? How did that work as far as starting to make money on the book side of things?
Wool was definitely like completely outsized from everything before. It was my 7th published work. I had 5 novels and another novelette before that, and things were starting to build. I never thought I would make any money writing. I went into it with very low expectations. I had the dream, but I didn't have any expectations of it. So I had to do it because I loved it. And I told myself that's the only way that I would make it through lean years and disappointing years. Do it because you love it. Don't do it because you're expecting anything immediately, because it won't happen immediately, and then you'll get frustrated and you'll quit. But I was getting to where I was making like a couple $100 a month just on sales from these other books. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but my living expenses were so low that this was like, all my utilities.
Yeah, right.
So, but then Wool hit and things changed. Like within a month, Wool was out earning everything else I'd written. And it was only a 99-cent short story. So I was only making 35 cents a sale. But the first month I sold 1,000 copies. And in the next month, I sold 10,000 copies, and it just kept going up. And so it got to where I was making, once I had like the 5 parts of Wool published, I was making 6 figures a month, just, from book sales on Amazon. And I never thought it would continue. I thought, okay, 1 month of this, sock this away for a rainy day fund, but like, don't expect it to ever happen again. And it kept happening for like 3 years, And it was the reason it was happening because I kept thinking, okay, this isn't going to continue. So go at this as hard as you can And eventually I realized the reason it's continuing is because you're going at it so hard. At some point, you got to ease up on yourself.
So you said you wrote Wool as a short story first. And then at what point did you just say like, oh, I need to like turn this into a novel? And then was that hard? Like, it's almost like, had you kind of put it to bed and then it was like, okay, now I got to like think of 1,000 more pages to write, to fill out this story to make it a novel. Like, how did you like go through that process?
That's exactly what happened. I wrote a story where it's, I can spoil it because it's only 50 pages long before you figure this out, but all the main characters are dead. And I wrote that, published it, I didn't promote it. I just set it aside and went back to my novels. But the reviews, at first I saw the sales. It just like my monthly income shot up and I had to go look at my report to see what was happening. And this short story was selling like gangbusters. And so I went and looked at the reviews. And back then I knew how many reviews I had on everything just at a glance because they come in so slowly. And this had hundreds of reviews really quickly.
Right.
And the only complaint people had, the main thing people were asking for was more. They were like, this was amazing, but it was short. Where's the rest of this? And I had no more. That was it. So I had to do exactly what you said. I had to sit down and imagine the next 1,000 pages of this story. And because it was successful as a short story, I thought, okay, don't mess up what's working. Write another short story that continues this and treat it like comic books or like TV episodes. Tell an entertaining small story that builds the bigger story. And once I started writing, once I had 3 of these out, I was like, okay, it'll take 5 of these to tell the whole story. And that became the plan. And once the 5th one was published, that was it. I was going to have 5 short stories called Wool, part 1 through 5. And one day someone emailed me and said, hey, I don't want to click on 5 links. Can you combine these into a single PDF or something? And I was like, fine. Just for that one person, right. I was like, fine. I'll make your life easier. It took me like half a day to combine the books, put a new cover art on it, upload it in a new product. And that became what's called the Wool Omnibus. And next thing I knew, everyone else had the same idea this guy had. Instead of buying the 5 books individually, they just started buying. As a matter of fact, the reviews on the 5 books were like, don't bother buying this. Go buy the novel instead. Like once you read this one, you're going to want the other one. Save yourself the money. Go buy the omnibus. So even the reviews on the best-selling short stories were saying, go buy the novel. Next thing I know, that novel was selling so many copies, the New York Times had to list it on their bestseller list. And that changes everything. It was a self-published, the publisher was like my name. And then I had agents right. contacting me. I had film deals coming at me. It just changed everything once that hit the list.
That's so interesting to hear that backstory because Mark and I were actually talking before we started recording, and I was talking about how I found the structure of the book really cool because how, you have these characters and then you meet these new characters, but then the other characters, as you said, are gone, and just like keeps this like chain of these characters. And I was like, I've never read a book quite like that before, but it really worked, and I was like, that's funny to hear how it came together that way. That's really, really cool.
Yeah, I don't think I could have published it through a traditional publisher. When I took it to publishers, and they were making like incredible offers, but they were also like, we're not sure about this, how you started. And we don't know if you can get away with this. And meanwhile, it's selling it's outselling all of their books. And so it's not like I'm a genius. Right. It was accidental. I stumbled onto this, but it is funny how dealing with people who are very, I would say creatively conservative, they don't want to, they want to kind of recreate what's already worked. They had a really hard time understanding why this was any kind of success.
That's such a common, I feel like that's such a common thing, when someone does something great or different, it's kind of like, oh, well, everyone who was the expert said that wouldn't work or that wasn't a good idea, and then it's like, it worked. When you first wrote the short story, did you think like, oh, this is gold? Like this is the best thing I've written? Like, what was your thought process after you had written that? Did you think, this is gonna be #1 bestseller, or were you like, okay, that was fun, I'm glad I got those thoughts out of my head and like kind of move on to the next thing?
It was more the latter. It was all of the little short story I wrote, it was going to be an entire novel, but I was working on other books. People wanted sequels to these other stories. But this story was haunting me, the story that became Wool. And so my idea was just to get it out as a short story, so I wasn't taking up, headspace, and get back to the novels. When I wrote it, to me, it was my favorite thing that I'd written so far. It was deeply emotional. I loved the mystery and the way you couldn't really understand, no matter what you thought was happening, you would second guess yourself, just like a good mystery novel. But I didn't think it was commercial at all. Like I didn't promote it. I charged 99 cents for it and forgot about it. So it's wild how the things you're most passionate about are probably the things that have the most commercial potential. And the opposite is not true. The things you think that you're just chasing a trend or doing something because you think it has market value, you're probably going to get beat out by someone who happens to be doing something similar, but they're doing it because it's their passion.
All right, we're going to pause this conversation here. Go to thefridayhabit.com. There you can find show notes for this episode. There you can also find links to our websites and ways to get in touch. At the bottom of the page, you can download our guide to the Friday Habit System that will show you how to set aside one full day each week dedicated to working on your business instead of in your business. If you're not already, make sure you subscribe. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear next week's episode, subscribe so you get notified. Also, leave us a review in Apple Podcast app or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you want to potentially be on one of our episodes with a question you ask us, go ahead and record a quick message in your phone, voice memo, and email it to hello@thefridayhabit.com. Until next time, live every day like it's Friday.